Hi, everybody. This is Mary Beth from Operation Parent. I just wanted to welcome you in to the webinar today. We're going to get started in about another minute, but this way we can let the attendees get into the webinar system. So in about another minute, we'll begin. Okay, got a few more people coming in. Got less than a minute, and then we'll get going. Okay, well, welcome everyone to Operation Parent's webinar, Addiction in the Family. My name is Mary Beth Uberti, and I am the program developer here at Operation Parent. And today our presenter for this webinar is Kim Hinkle, who is the founder of SOS for Addictions. So we are really happy to have you join us today. This webinar will be 45 minutes in length. So we'll be ending around hopefully 2:45, but we will have questions and answers at the end. As we begin though, I just want to take a few moments to go over the GoToWebinar panel, which will allow you to fully participate in this session today. So first, with your GoToWebinar panel, you have a little orange box with an arrow in it. That is your grab tab. So if you would just click on that arrow, you will see that your tab will minimize and then open your control panel. So if you want to go ahead and click that just to get a feel for it, and then just go ahead and click it again and make sure your panel is open so that you can see some of your features that we're going to go over today. Okay, so next, hold on for just a second here. So next, all attendees will be muted during this presentation. However, we would like to hear from you via the questions section. So if you just move your eyes down to that question section, and that is about halfway down your control panel, you can send both questions and comments here. There are 3 panels. The top panel will show you any questions you already have posted, and below that is another light blue panel where you can type your questions and then send them to us. So let's go ahead and give this a try now. And Michelle, who is co-hosting with me today, Massey, she will go ahead and read off responses, but I would like you to click in that second box and just type in your first name and where you are attending from and send that to us. And Michelle, as you see them come in, go ahead and read them off.
Good afternoon, Dawn from London, Linda from Arizona, Stephanie from Carson City, Holly from Nantucket, Amy from Ohio, Abigail, Nora, Michael from Prestonsburg, Amy from Louisville, Melissa from Arkansas, Michelle from Florida, Tara from Lexington, Lori from New York, California, Jasmine, Christy, Prestonsburg again, how are you? Amy from Ohio, Bailey from Carson City, Anna from Alabama. Amazing group. We're so glad you are with us today.
All right, thank you, everybody. So that's how that works. And as a reminder, you will be muted during this presentation. So if you have any questions for the presenter, please send them that way to our staff. And what will happen as we go through the webinar is Michelle will see all these questions come in. And then at the end of the webinar, we will have the question and answer section with our presenter. So go ahead and take the time as you're going through, think of a question, go ahead and send it. So further down in the panel, you will see the handout section. About 45 minutes to an hour prior to the start of this webinar today, I did send out an email to everyone with the handouts for you. So if you had any chance to download them, you got that in the email, but they are also available in this webinar in that handout section. So if you click on that little portion of the panel, you'll see 3 handouts. One is the dysfunctional family roles. The second is, how does a parental substance abuse or alcohol abuse impact a child? And the last one is the addiction in the family presentation handout. This is screenshots of what we're seeing today. So to begin the download process, you just go ahead and double click on the document and the download will begin. Something to keep in mind, if you're downloading during this live event, you can only download during the live event. Once I shut down the webinar at the very end, the handouts will no longer be available during to you. So you'd have to go back to the email I sent to you. So also at the end of this live event, there will be a short survey sent directly to you. It'll take about 2 minutes to complete, but it really provides us with valuable feedback on the event itself, plus ways that we can provide you with additional information. So we are at the end of all the details that we need to go over. And so right now, I just like to turn over the event to our guest presenter, Kim Hinkle of SOS Addictions.
Hi, good afternoon. Mary Beth, Michelle, thank you for having me today. Thanks to everyone who has joined in. As Michelle was naming off all the different states, it sounds like we have a great representation across the nation. As everyone probably is aware, I don't think there's a family out there that doesn't know of someone or has not been touched by addiction themselves. So I appreciate everyone joining in, and I look forward to answering any questions at the end. I currently work as a community resource specialist with KIPTA, which is an area development district in the state of Kentucky that works with older adults. And through the Older Americans Act, area development districts receive funding. Actually, I should say area agencies on aging receive funding to support family caregiver programs. There's federal and state dollars in the state of Kentucky, and so we also have a Kentucky caregiver program. And what that funding does is help support caregivers take care of their loved ones. And you probably are wondering, well, what does this have to do with addiction? Well, there's a lot of kinship families throughout the country that have stepped up to the plate and are raising grandchildren, nieces, nephews, younger siblings because of the addiction crisis that we've seen. So in our area, some of our area development districts and area agencies on aging have a specific program for Kentucky caregivers where we create funding and provide a stipend to help support some of these caregivers. So prior to coming to KIPTA, I was a volunteer and then promoted to a supervisor for court-appointed special advocates. And for those of you that may not know what they do, they represent families and children in family court during removal processes. So when I was working at CASA, I recognized a lot of these families were in court due to neglect that stemmed from substance use. And therefore it kind of came full circle. I was seeing a lot of families struggling, not knowing where to turn for resources and help. And we have two different kinds of caregivers that are taking care of these kids nowadays. You have your traditional ones who go through family court. Child Protective Services are involved. They get a caseworker, they get social workers that help connect them with resources. But then we know that there are a great number of informal caregivers. These are the grandparents or relatives that have just stepped up to the plate. Mom and dad may have just taken off and left the kids with grandma over the weekend and never came back, or you know, they're in recovery or in programs, and you know, the grandparents are trying to raise these kids. So in the state of Kentucky, we rank very high. I think the last I looked, we were #1 in the nation on relative caregiver placement. So it's a huge problem here in the state. We also doubled the national average of babies being born with neonatal abstinence syndrome because of the opiate crisis. So, you know, like every other state, you know, we're struggling to try to find supports and resources for these families. And I'm very passionate about the work that I do because I too was impacted by a family member with a substance use problem. My spouse, ex-husband now, he had a substance use problem well before the opiate crisis came to be. His stemmed from prescription pain pills that progressed on to other drugs. And I saw the impact that it had on my own children in the house. And then when I got into family court and saw other families struggling, and then came to the area agency on aging and started working directly with some of these caregivers, I knew that this was my calling. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. So with that, I'll tell you a little bit more about SOS for Addictions in the next slide. So it's our mission to foster hope. We provide individuals and families struggling with addiction the opportunity to search for and connect with professionals and service providers. We understand the holistic approach required for treatment and recovery and strive to educate families in the community on the disease of addiction. There's still a large stigma out there in the community. Some people think that, you know, these folks are just making bad choices and why can't they get their act together and stop using? But we know that, you know, it is a brain disease. We know that families are being torn apart because of it, and families don't know how to help support that loved one. So when they do seek treatment and try to return and regain their life, the families are still turned upside down from what had happened. And so there's this disconnect. And what we try to do is connect these families to supports and resources so that they can understand how to better support their loved one that has the addiction. So for today, I'm just basically going to talk about Addiction 101. Most of you all are probably aware of it that work in some of these coalitions. We'll discuss the impact of parental substance abuse, the family dynamics and how they change, and how to help families heal. The learning outcomes are going to be how addiction impacts the youth in the household. As I mentioned earlier, I saw the effects that it had on my own children, and then I've seen it with other families and children that I've worked with in family court. We'll understand the family dynamics and the roles that family members take to survive while dealing with addiction in the home. And we'll discuss how to help the family heal when working through the addiction. So real quickly, abuse is how addiction starts out. So for example, if someone gets prescribed prescription drugs and they've kept them in their cabinet and haven't used all their prescription, but someone else in, hey, you know, my back's been hurting and, you know, I could really use some stronger medicine. You know, the aspirin and Tylenol just isn't getting it. And so their neighbor says, well, you know what? I have some medicine that was left over from my knee surgery. Why don't you have it? That's abuse. That person is giving another individual those drugs that were not prescribed for them. So abuse can also be caused by substances such as alcohol. You know, we here in Kentucky, we live in a bourbon capital. A lot of bourbon comes out of the state of Kentucky. And, you know, we have a lot of folks who can go out and socially drink responsibly. But then you have those individuals that, you know, they start out as drinking socially, but then it progresses to a dependence and, you know, their body's craving it. They start having withdrawals. And so they, rather than having 2 glasses of wine at a social event, they have to have 5 or 6 glasses. Or instead of having a beer or 2 while they're out on the lake, they have to have a 12-pack. that's considered abuse. If you're not going to drink responsibly, you know, you're leading yourself down a path of dependency. And then with addiction, for a lot of kids, the brain is growing as they age. And they say that the brain is not fully developed until it reaches the age of 23 or thereabout. 21 to 23 is when the brain is fully developed. Well, during that time, the front part of your brain is the last part to really develop. And that's the part, the frontal lobe, that's where your concentration, your planning, problem solving, decision making. You'll hear people say, teenagers, boy, they're irrational. They just make, bad choices. They didn't think things through. Well, that's because their brain hasn't fully developed. So you take that brain and you compromise it with alcohol or drugs, that's going to make that impairment, that cognitive ability, function even less. So the pleasure sensation comes from the neurotransmitter, the dopamine. Dopamine increases 5 to 10 times more when it's introduced by drugs. So the dopamine is something that we naturally create. Your body naturally creates it. It's that feel-good feeling, when you look at a baby that's laughing and you smile, or you see an image that brings back pleasurable thoughts, dopamine is released. When you exercise, you're releasing some dopamine. So once you start impairing that brain and conditioning that brain on the drugs, the stimuli that you're introducing to it, your brain gets reconditioned. And the reward that your brain gets from the introduction of these drugs over time causes your brain to stop producing the dopamine naturally, and it starts basically craving the added stimuli that you have given it over the past time. So once the brain changes, that's when you start seeing the addictive behaviors where people are making really poor choices and they lose sense of control and they have that intense drug-seeking drive. These are the folks that, are going to go and rob their neighbors so they can get some equipment to maybe go pawn off and get some money so they can buy their drugs. Even, right now, we're seeing a large tidal wave, I guess, of the heroin and the fentanyl and all the overdoses stemming from the fentanyl and the carfentanil that's being mixed in with the heroin. But we still have a problem with other drugs. Meth is on the rise again. Cocaine is coming back again. When we talk about addiction, it's not just these hard drugs. Addiction also can be nicotine. Look at the number of people that you probably know who are addicted to smoking. So you take a young teenager and you introduce them to the nicotine, and their brain isn't fully developed. It's more compromised with the introduction of that nicotine. So what it boils down to is the earlier a child is introduced to these stimuli, these drugs, the more likely they are to be addicted. And on the slide, you'll see 1 in 4 Americans who began using addictive substances before the age of 18 is addicted, compared to 1 in 25 Americans who started using at age 21 or older. And that, again, is because that brain is not fully developed until it's about 21 or 23 years of age. So with all that said, parents are the most powerful influence over a teen's decision of whether or not to use substances. And I hear a lot of older parents say, my kids don't listen to me. They're teenagers. They don't care what I have to say. They're going to listen to what their friends are saying, what their friends are doing. But statistically, in surveys, it shows that, the parents do matter. You have to set the stage on what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So if parents don't disapprove of substance use, teens are more likely to view it as acceptable behavior. For marijuana, they're 8 times likelier to use marijuana because they feel it's acceptable. They're 9 times likelier to view smoking as acceptable behavior. And they're 10 times likelier to view getting drunk as acceptable behavior when the parents are not talking about what is and what is not acceptable in the home. So we know, some kids do go to parties and can, socially drink and not become addicted. They could smoke pot, not become addicted. Same for any substance. But we need to look at the risk factors, because that has something to do with how vulnerable these kids are to engage in risky behaviors. So if children are aggressive during their childhood, if there's a lot of violence exposure in the home, lack of parental supervision, poor social skills, drug experimentation, how readily accessible the drugs are in the school, and like many other social problems, community poverty is a risk factor for kids engaging in substance use. Some of the protective factors to look at is good self-control, parental monitoring and support, positive relationships, and that's between parents, peers, community leaders, how well the school and the community has anti-drug policies in place, and neighborhood pride. If kids come from a neighborhood where, it's run down and on every corner of the street there's drug dealers handing out drugs, that puts them at a greater risk of trying to use drugs just to fit in, compared to a community that has anti-drug policies and is setting good examples. So what's the impact of parental substance abuse? We know it's bad when the kids use it, and we try to prevent them from using any substances. But for those kids who come from homes where the parents are the ones using the drugs, we see the impairment of cognitive abilities with these parents. Again, that frontal lobe, that cognitive thinking, making rational, irrational decisions, that's impaired by the use of the drugs. Some families have mental illness in the home with the parents. Some of the mental illness can be brought on by using drugs. There's also physical and emotional neglect, and that's mostly what I saw in our family courts here in Kentucky, is the parents just were unable to meet the child's basic needs. Their money was going towards drugs, so, they lost their jobs, they couldn't keep the electric on, there wasn't much food in the home, kids weren't getting to school on time. A lot of that is simply neglect because of the substance use. There's also a risk of domestic violence in the home, especially if the parents are allowing other individuals into the home that are using drugs as well. You hear a lot of reports about drug deals gone bad, and these kids are just exposed to a lot of additional risk factors when the parents are using drugs. Another impact is the removal of the kids. It's bad enough that they're in the home being exposed to mom or dad, or both mom and dad, using the drugs, but then if they're removed from their custody, that's trauma to those kids. Same with incarceration. If, we see a lot of that in our state. I think Kentucky ranks, first in the nation on the number of parents, actually mothers, who are incarcerated. So we have a lot of kids who are removed, being raised by grandparents or other family members because the parents are incarcerated. And then right now we're seeing so much of overdoses and deaths across the region and across the state and nation for that matter. And, you know, a lot of times these kids are removed and placed with relatives because their natural parents have died. So what do the family dynamics look like in a home where there's substance use going on? Well, you have the person with the drug abuse, the drug problem. And, you know, I try to stay away from using the word addict. A lot of times people refer to a person with the drug problem as an addict, and I don't like placing labels on people. They have a substance use disorder. So I try, again, I'll try to not say the word addict as we go through here, and I'll refer to them as the drug abuser. But then you also have the enabler. You have what's called a family hero, a scapegoat, a lost child, and a mascot. And in the next slide, in the next slide, I'll go over more of the dysfunctional family roles and break it down for you. So in the next slide, you'll see with the drug abuser, their behavior, their behavior is the addiction. And so their defense mechanism is going to be denial. They don't recognize that they have a problem or that they're doing anything wrong. Again, their cognitive thinking, their reasoning, their rationalizing isn't working properly. They do have feelings of shame and guilt. I mean, because they see what's going on around them, but they're not at a point that they can control it yet until they go and seek treatment or support. And, you know, a lot of times, you know, they recognize what they're doing is wrong, and they might say, you know, do as I say, not as I do. But in a lot of cases, you know, kids are very aware of what's going on. They know what looks normal, what doesn't look normal, why, you know, if mom's always sleeping on the couch when they come home from school and she can't get up to cook dinner or do laundry and, you know, take care of the kids, they recognize that. So with the enabler, that's going to be someone in the home who is very worried, overprotective. Their defense mechanism is more along avoidance. They have feelings of anger and helplessness. In many cases, the enabler turns out to be the spouse of someone with the addiction, or it could be a parent of a child with an addiction, you know, and, you know, they don't know what to do to help. The family hero, very rigid in their behavior. They have feelings of false guilt, and what they're trying to do is overcompensate and bring something good into the home for the family to focus on that's not negative. Because as many of you all are probably aware, there is a lot of chaos going on in the homes. There's lying, cheating, manipulation, and, you know, it really turns things upside down. And so the family hero is going to be that person in the home that's trying to make something positive out of the family. The scapegoat's going to be the individual who might have rebellious behavior, they're delinquent, their defense mechanism is substituting, and a lot of times they may feel inferior to others inside the home. I see a lot of parents that place blame on someone for the reason they're using drugs, and that's going to be your scapegoat. That's going to be when that person with the addiction says, you know, it's your fault that I began drinking in the first place. You stressed me out, or I didn't know how to cope with it, or, you know, you didn't raise me right as I was growing up, and therefore they're placing the blame on their parent. So again, it's more of finger pointing and trying to place blame on someone for what's going on in the home. The lost child is going to be the very passive child. They're going to be very lonely. They kind of retreat and just keep to themselves because, you know, they don't want to step into that chaos and they just want to remove themselves. And so the best thing for them to do is to isolate themselves. And then there's always a mascot or clown in some of these homes. And that's going to be the individual who's trying to be the jokester, the overactive person, trying to bring something funny to the household, you know, trying to get people to laugh because there's a lot of sadness going on in these homes. So in the next slide, we're going to see how to help some of these families heal. Now, understanding enabling behaviors and family roles, we just discussed some of those, but it's so hard for some families to actually step back and put on a different lens and actually look at what's going on because, again, there's so much chaos and you're living in the moment and just trying to deal with today's drama, and it's hard to step back and try to look at it, you know, in a different perspective. Detachment and codependency are really, really vital. Codependency would be when all the attention and the energy is on the family member with the addiction. So the codependent person, you know, is sacrificing his or her own needs to take care of the person with the addiction. You know, I've heard some people say that, again, that's a label, and some families that, you know, have a loved one in the home with an addiction, they don't like the word codependent. They feel like it's an ugly word. It's bringing shame to them. But in my personal situation, I was very codependent. I didn't understand what was going on and how things were evolving in the home. And I was definitely codependent. You have good intentions, but the actions of bailing out or rescuing or covering for making excuses for them, all that does is allows that addictive family member to continue on a destructive path instead of learning how to detach, and in the next bullet, learning how to set healthy boundaries. So some examples of setting healthy boundaries would be like, you know, I'm not going to give you any more money when your electric gets turned off, or I'm not going to give you, you know, any more money when you don't have the money to pay for your cell phone. It could also be setting boundaries and saying, you know what, there's not going to be any more drug or alcohol use in the home, and I don't want any of your friends coming over and drinking and drugging in the home. And that might sound like a no-brainer to some of you, but in some of these families that get so lost, the codependency that's evolving in the family, there's a lot of parents who continue to let their child use drugs in the home because they feel like it's safer than them being out on the streets and not knowing where they're at. And for each family, it's different, but when families can learn to step back and start creating boundaries and understanding the codependency, it starts to heal the family, because if they don't learn about that, when that person finally does go for treatment and returns back to that household, all those bad habits are still in place. Accept all the feelings without guilt. I mean, this addiction that we're seeing now, it is ripping families apart. It is killing families. It's killing our communities. You know, and it's okay to address and work through your feelings without guilt. It's nobody's fault. So don't accept the blame on, you know, why your family member or your best friend is using drugs, because, you know, a lot of times they will point the blame until they finally start trying to get healthy themselves. These are some other suggestions on how to help families heal. So a lot of people talk about autonomy of an addict, and I hear some people say, well, if they're going to use it, why should we force them into treatment? You got to hit rock bottom before you can get treatment or want help. But in so many cases, as we've explained, the brain is not at this point. It's been hijacked. The individual is no longer in control of making rational decisions, and therefore they're going to continue to use until someone steps in and forces treatment. And here in Kentucky, we have what's called Casey's Law. Kentucky and Ohio both have Casey's Law in act. And if you want to check it out, it's caseyslaw.org. But that is an avenue for families to file a petition in court to force their loved one into treatment. And the last I heard, I know in Indiana, they have something called the Jennifer Act, which is similar. And I'm sure there's other states as well that have some sort of legislation act in place to help families who want to force their loved one into treatment. The problem that we're seeing is if the treatment isn't long enough for them to get to a point that they're not going to return to that substance use, then, if they get out and they use again, we're seeing a lot of them overdosing because they start using at the dosage that they had used prior to going into treatment. And during that time of usage in the beginning, they had built up a tolerance. So once they get clean and they come out, if they use again at that high dosage level, they're setting themselves at risk for a potential overdose. So again, that tolerance is part of that dependency and that buildup of addiction. The biggest thing that I saw in family court was talking to the kids. These kids that have grown up in the home and have seen their mom or dad using drugs, talk to the kids about it. A lot of caregivers are afraid to talk to the kids. They don't know what to say. They're afraid if they say something, they might it might look like they're encouraging the child to use drugs in the future. But kids are very wise and smart, and you can talk to them at a very early age, and at their level to make them understand that, mom and dad didn't make those choices because they didn't love you. Mom and dad, or mom or dad, have a health problem. I mean, it's no different than diabetes. We have a lot of chronic diseases out there that people can manage with medications and health and change in lifestyles. And that's exactly how we're going to have to treat this addiction problem. There's medication out there that can help some believe in the abstinence program, but, you have to look at the holistic approach. You have to look at their environment and how the environment is setting them at risk for using and relapsing. Increase those protective factors that we talked about earlier. And there is a genetic predisposition for families who have substance use in the home. I would encourage some families to sit there and, map it out, make a chart and see how far back the lineage substance use has been a problem in the family. Because, if you see that it is a problem, then you know that there's a genetic predisposition that's going to make that child more likely to get addicted to a substance if they use. And don't be afraid to ask for help. A lot of what the coalitions are doing is trying to reduce the stigma. Washington, there's been a lot of movement in trying to reduce the stigma so that people will go out and seek the help. And I can't encourage enough how effective support groups are. That's where families can really sit down with other individuals who are walking that same path. Every family's different, but a lot of the behaviors that you see with the manipulation and the lying, sometimes you feel like you're losing your mind. So to seek help through a support group where you can connect with other people and they can assure you that, you know, you're not going crazy, and get that help, you know, if you just need to talk to somebody about what's going on. On this slide, we've got a few more ways that families can heal themselves. Journaling feelings is a big one for kids. You know, kids are reluctant, well, some kids are reluctant to talk about their feelings, more boys than girls, but to just write down what they're feeling, especially if mom or dad's incarcerated, you know, let them write letters and get it off their chest, because if the kids are not talking about their feelings, they're internalizing, you know, the hurt that they've experienced, and they're going to end up either exploding one day from all the built up emotions. They're not going to learn how to cope with their feelings or talk to somebody about it. So journaling is a very good way as an outlet for them. Find time for self-care. And watch changes in behavior and mood for kids. You know, if you start seeing sleep problems, or if they're angry or irritable, or you see a big change and they appear depressed or sad, seek a mental health counselor and ask for a trauma screening. We don't do enough of that. We know that the families and the children in these environments are exposed to a whole lot of trauma. And so there are screening tools out there that clinicians can use to assess whether trauma is an issue, and then get the proper counseling for that. And make baby steps towards change. All of this didn't happen overnight, and it's not going to fix overnight either. You know, when it comes to setting boundaries, you know, don't do it all at once and say, okay, you know, these are the new rules in the house and you're going to have to abide by A, B, C, and D. Try one at a time, and take baby steps to healing your family. So on the next slide, I believe we have some resources for those of you in any state. Every state has area agencies on aging, and that's where you can connect with your AAA to find out about caregiver support. There is a national program for individuals 55 years of age and older who would qualify for a stipend if they're kinship caregivers. And like I said, Kentucky has a federal grant, a state grant that provides some funding, and some of the other states may have that also. In Kentucky, we have a kinship coalition to help families connect with other supports and services. And then Generations United is a national organization that does a lot of advocacy in Washington on kinship families. The next two resources are just some websites that you can check out to stay updated on trends and what's happening with the drugs in our communities. And I would encourage any family, you know, to seek support within your schools, your churches, your communities, because there's a lot of coalitions out there that are trying to address the problem. And then on my website, sosforaddictions.com, we have supports and services listed throughout the state of Kentucky, quite a few in Ohio and in Indiana. So I want to thank you for joining me today. You can contact me if you have any questions, or if you have something you want added to my website directory. You can contact me on my contact page. And I'm going to turn it back over to Mary Beth and Michelle.
Hey, thank you, Kim. Thank you so much. We're just going to go through a few more slides here, everybody, and then we'll go to the question and answer. So, Kim, if you could just stay on the line, and we'll get through these. For those of you that have joined us today and like what you heard, please find Operation Parent on Facebook. We post there frequently during the week with great articles and resources and contacts. So that's another way to connect with Operation Parent. Sign up for our e-newsletter. You can do that at our website. And then purchase a parent handbook, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Just so you know what our next webinar will be, it will be about e-cigs and vaping on Monday, July 30th at 2 p.m. We have a doctor from American Academy of Pediatrics. In particular, this unit of it deals with the tobacco industry, whether it's the traditional cigarettes or vaping e-cigs. So great informational session on what is going on with that, how does that affect the brain, and what is going on with the usage, especially of these two products. So you can register at operationparent.org. These are our handbooks, our parent handbooks. They can be ordered online or call our office. And that's some of our topics we cover in the middle school, high school edition. And we also do community presentations. I do go out into the community across the state of Kentucky and into other states to do presentations to parents, businesses, students. So with that, I'm going to open up and ask Michelle, do we have any questions?
We do have questions, and I wanted to remind our guest, if you have a burning question that you wanted to submit at this point, we have room for that. Also know that we understand if you need to hop off the line. We will stay on the line, though, until all the questions are answered this afternoon. Our first question is, will there be an archived version of this webinar that we would have permission to use with our coalition?
Okay, we, as I mentioned, we are recording this. The recording will go out tomorrow to anyone who registered. At this stage right now, we have the archives, we're building them. We are also redoing our entire website. And with that new website that'll get launched in the fall, I believe there will be an archive supply. But right at this moment, you'll just get the recording for your usage. But as of being able to go back and get all the other ones until we get our new website up and running in the fall, that's just not possible, unfortunately, but it is coming.
The next question is, will we be sending out a reminder or a link to the webinar on vaping and e-cigs?
Yes, there will be, it's on our website already for the registration. So if you go to our homepage, it's already there. We will start sending out the announcements, usually a week or two, it's 2 weeks prior to the actual event, just re-announcing the event. So you're actually the first ones hearing about this upcoming event. And then 2 weeks prior, the mass emails will go out to anybody who's ever registered for a webinar or is on our e-newsletter list.
Excellent. Our next question is, can we get definitions of the roles, the family roles that we talked about today?
Kim, I can answer that. That is one of the handouts. So one of the 3 handouts is the dysfunctional family roles, and it has all the definitions laid out for you. So make sure you download that either now before we shut down the webinar, because it's available to you now, or go look in your email. I sent out all the handouts about 45 minutes prior to the start of this webinar.
Okay, great. That's the final question at this point.
Kim, is there anything you wanted to add as we get ready to shut this down today?
No, I just wanted to thank you for inviting me. I appreciated it, and it was very interesting.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kim. We really appreciate you being here, and also for all the attendees, thank you so much. Again, there will be a short survey being sent to you as soon as we shut this down today. So please just take a moment. It will take about a minute to answer it. Also, be on the lookout for tomorrow. There will be another email coming to you that has the recorded link for this webinar, and you'll be able to watch the webinar again. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close out. For Kim, thank you, and Michelle and myself, thank you so much for being here today. Bye-bye.